Good morning, Splunk Phantom community. You got Sam here, and in this short video series, I want to talk about the difference between decision blocks and filter blocks. So, interestingly, I had originally planned to cover this topic in just a single video, but after going through my initial planning phase, I decided that I couldn't cover all the details at the level that I wanted with just a single video. I kind of felt that common ground must be established. So instead, we're going to break things up into a few short videos. And in each video, I'll start with some general statements about the block, and then iterate more and more specific technical details. So, kicking off the series, we're going to do a relatively deep look at the decision blocks. At a high level, the decision blocks control the flow of a playbook based on one or more matching criteria. When we create a decision block, we can see some basic settings. First, under Advanced Settings, General Settings, we can see the name, description, and notes. Under the Join settings, we can see that in this case there's no settings to configure. However, since this is a very important concept, we're going to come back and explore in just a bit. But the main point of interest here are the if conditions themselves. Here we have an if statement. We have a parameter, a comparison operator, and then a value. So for a trivial example, I might have a condition that says, let's say now year is greater than 1999. And then I want to do, so if the year is greater than 1999, I want to do one thing. Otherwise, I want to do something else. So this is how you build conditions in a decision block. And one thing to note is that as you're creating these conditions, colors will appear for each condition, and a corresponding color will appear on the block itself. And this is how you know which path you should build on for the condition that's matched. So in this case, so long as my computer clock was set correctly, it will evaluate to true because the year is greater than 1999, and then we would go down whatever I connect this green path to. If the condition were something like 2050, then of course this would evaluate to false, and then we'd fall down to this else path, and then whatever I connect this to is what would get executed. Two more quick notes about if conditions. The first one is, when you're building a condition, you're not limited to a single parameter and value. You can use this little plus sign, and you can add compound conditions with multiple parameters. So for example, I might say the month has to be equal to December. And in this case, because I have this selected as an and, it would have to be greater than 2050 and December for this to evaluate to true. Now, Phantom supports the OR operator as well, and you can have multiple conditions. However, you can only have an and or an or. You'll notice they both, once I change the top one, they both change. You can't mix and match and or. So the and statement, every condition must evaluate to true, right? This has to be true and this has to be true. An or statement, any one of them has to be true for the entire statement to be true. So as of the time of this recording, it's August. So I might go down to month and select August. And so now this will evaluate to true because the year being greater than 2050 is not true, but the current month, as of this recording, is August. And so this will evaluate to true. And so this whole thing will evaluate to true. So what or means is one or more true statements. And means every statement has to be true for the condition to evaluate to true. The last thing to note for the condition block is that you can have a maximum of 5 conditions. So I can have an else if and an else. So now I'm at 3, 1, 2, 3 conditions. I can have 2 more. I can add 1 more and 1 more. And now you'll notice my buttons went away. I have corresponding colors with each of my conditions. And that's as much as I can do with this block. For a point of clarity, the else and else if conditions do behave differently. There's always a max of 1 else condition in a in a decision block. And the else condition is kind of a catch-all. If each one of these conditions evaluate to false, so say the year is greater than 2050, that's false. Whatever this is false, 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 then this will always run. If we get to the else statement, this guy's running. However, the very first one of these to evaluate to true is going to run. So the else will only ever run if all other conditions are false. And if I don't have an else condition and all of these can evaluate to false, then we just won't move any farther along the playbook. So it's important to think these things through when you're designing your playbook. So for this next part, we'll build a small playbook and iterate into a little bit deeper evaluation of what's happening in decision blocks. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the recording, we're going to iterate through a series of examples that get more and more technical. So in this case, I've started to stub out a playbook that is simply going to prompt a user a question and then make a decision based on their answer. So if we look at this prompt, you can see that I'm saying, do you use Phantom? It's response type message. That goes into a decision block, goes into another prompt, which is as yet unconfigured, and then goes to the end. So let's configure the second block here, the decision block. And I'm going to say if, and I can reference my prompt 1, if my response is equal to, so I'll say yes, and I'll add an else if, and I'll say if my response is equal to no, and then finally we'll have an else statement. So we have the response is yes, no, or something else, essentially. The green is the yes case, and purple is no case. So we have the green going to this other prompt, which I've almost pre-configured. So we've got user said yes. This is just going to message us what the user said. Then I will say prompt. User said no. All right. And the else condition was this yellowish orange color. And we're going to go ahead and drag that over here to yet one more prompt. User said something else. Okay. So I'm going to save this. And I'll call it community demo. And I'll run this in the debugger so we can actually experience what's happening in this playbook. So if I come back over here, we can see this prompt 1. I'll click that. Do you use Phantom? I do, so I'll type in yes. I'll hit complete, and we should get a prompt again where user said yes. Cool. So we can see that I was prompted, do you use Phantom? I said yes. And in our decision block, we went over here where we were prompted again that said user said yes. Let's run it again, but this time I'll say something else. I'll put in random data. So let's run it again. Test. Should have a prompt waiting for me. I do. Do you use Phantom? Of course I do. That's not yes or no, so we should fall to the else case. I'll go ahead and complete that. I have another prompt. I look at the prompt, and user said something else. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we can see that our decision is working. But let's take a look under the hood. One of the really awesome things about Phantom is that you can jump right into the code to see what's actually happening. Now, I realize that everyone watching won't necessarily be a programmer, but I hope that if you stick with me, you should get some value out of this, or at least I'm hoping you will. So let's see what's actually happening in the code of the playbook. Okay, so I've selected the decision block, and you can see that I'm in def decision 1. This is decision 1. Almost immediately after the debug statement, we're calling this phantom.condition API right here with some parameters that we're going to talk about more later. But of interest immediately are these conditions. And you can see that the condition list is the exact same thing we typed in our configuration UI element. So you can see I have the response 0 element equals yes, equals no, and then the else condition, we're going to explain that in a minute. The phantom condition API returns two values. It returns the matched artifacts and the matched action results. Once it's run this query, so it searches for this condition, and immediately after it gets its values back from that API call, it checks to see if they exist. Do we have a matched artifact or a matched result? If we do, then prompt 2 is immediately called. That's this guy right here. And then this return statement says that we're done. There's no more processing in this decision. So what that means, and I made this point earlier, but what that means is that as soon as you have a match, then that's all she wrote. There's no more evaluation happening. We return out of the function, and that's it. So in this case, when I had said yes to the first prompt, it called the phantom condition. It checked if the match was yes, and because it was, when it came down here, we had positive results. It called prompt 2 and returned, and that was the end of it. On the second run through, it ran through the same code. It said, okay, I'm going to look at this condition. Did they say yes? This evaluated to false, this matched artifact 1 or match result 1, because I didn't say yes. And so those were evaluated to false. So it skipped this block. Then it said, did you say no? Right, the same basic logic here, which I did not say no. And so it skipped this block because this if condition evaluated to false. And finally, this is our else case. So this prompt right up here is what ran. And I mentioned earlier that the else block is a catch-all, and we can see that demonstrated here. We can also look at the debugger from the last time I ran it, and you can see that prompt 1 was called, and you can see that the manual action was completed by the user, and the user message, this is where I typed, of course I do, and then the decision was called, and we can carefully walk through this. You can see the first condition, of course I do, equals yes, false, and then the second condition, of course I do, right, that was my string, equals no, well that's also false, and so it fell down to the else condition, and you can see that the number 4 was called. So the key takeaway here is that in a decision tree, as soon as you have a match, then whatever corresponding block is next in the list for that match is what will be called, and then the decision block is done. It will do no further evaluation, and the path in the playbook is established. That's not to say there aren't more things to talk about, and we're going to get to those in the very next playbook example. So in the last playbook, we were using a prompt block to inform the decision block. And while that's not, wildly uncommon, it's much more likely that you'll be using the container or artifacts in the container to push your decision block. So I've gone ahead and created a container, ID 15, and I've put 2 artifacts in there. Each of these have a source address. The first from the United States is Google's DNS server, which geolocates to the United States. And then I have an IP address from North Korea, which obviously geolocates to North Korea. Okay, so in our playbook, I've got a geolocate IP. I use maxmind, and you can see that I'm using these source addresses. And again, those are the same type that are in these artifacts. That goes to a decision block where I'm looking at the country name, which is a property that comes back from maxmind API. And I'm saying if it equals United States, go down this path, green and green. Otherwise, go down this purple path. And on the green path, I've got USA branch, and on the purple path, I got not from USA. Now, hopefully what you would expect to happen is what will happen, which is when I run this, both of those artifacts will be processed, and the United States branch is present, and so we should go down this path. So let's just do that. I need to save it. Run a test. And we can see in the prompt that we are down the USA branch. Cool. But as promised, we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive. And we want to understand why did it go down this path for USA when we do in fact have a North Korean artifact here. So let's edit the playbook, and we will go into the code of the decision block. And now let's look at this a little bit more deeply than we had previously. In our definition, decision 1, we've got a bunch of parameters. We're not going to concern ourselves too much with those right now, except for this results. The results is what gets passed down the playbook, and we're gonna print that out and see it in a moment. And then we know that this phantom condition gets called, and it passes in the result, and it passes in these conditions to search for. And what we get back are the matched artifacts and the matched results. So what I want to do is I want to print these out so we can talk about them. Now you'll notice I hit enter a couple times in this code block, and now my GUI goes away. We know that custom code locks out the GUI interface to make changes. Okay, so I'm going to go and try to type. Let's see. We got a typing problem here. That was weird. Okay, phantom.debug, and I like to have this debug nomenclature. And I'm going to say results equals, and here I'm going to print out this results that gets passed in. Now it does say none here, but that just means that it defaults to none, but we will definitely be getting this in when this code block is called. Okay, so we're going to do a format, and then I'm going to do a json.dump string, and I'm going to dump the results object. I'm going to say I want an indent of 4 to get a little bit of a pretty print. And I'm going to do the same thing with this variable and this variable so we can see what's going on. So let's do that right now. So phantom.debug, matched artifact 1. I'm going to abbreviate for brevity, and then format json.dump string matched artifacts 1, indent equals 4. And lastly, max results 1 equals format json.dumps matched results 1 indent equals 4. Okay, I'm going to save this. All right, we have our code. Now if I run this again, it'll have the same result, of course. So I'll get the prompt, USA branch, okay. So let's look at the output in our log file. Okay, when the function was called, let's get this open side by side. Right here, where we do the results, the matched artifacts have already been determined. We're just printing the results first. So this data came into our function here from the Geolocate IP. And you can see that we've got the action results is a list, and we have two objects in here. We have this object, which is North Korea, and we have this object, which is United States. So that's what we received as results when this was called. Now we can see that the artifact 1 returned us nothing. That's fine. But our results from Geolocate IP did return something. And what it returned was the United States object. You'll notice that the North Korean object is missing, right? It came in as the result, but once we did this conditional lookup, it only found the one that matched the condition. So the very next thing that would have happened is if matched artifact, that would have been empty, but match result would have had this. And so prompt 1 would have been called, and that was the USA prompt. And then the function would have been over. So what happens is, in summary, is that we get a big JSON block that comes in, and the decision block will look for anything in there, and anything that matches will cause the matching block to fire, go down that particular path, and stop the decision block right in its tracks. The last point I want to make before we move on to the final playbook demo is that while we get this filtered result, we can print it out in the log because we get it from this matched artifact and this matched result. Get these data here. We don't pass this data down to the next block in the playbook, right? You don't see a matched artifacts 1 or matched results 1 anywhere in here. And so what that means is that this decision block does find a match, you can see here, but once the decision block is over, we lose it forever. We can't go back and reuse this data, right? There's no downstream block that we can say, hey, what matched that decision block? Or at least not out of the box, we can't. So that's a key point to remember, is that once a decision block is done, whatever condition matched is lost to you. Okay, so here we have our last playbook we want to discuss. And hopefully you notice something unique here, which is that we have 2 action blocks terminating into a decision block. Now these action blocks are Geolocate Ip. We edit the playbook. We have the same source address that we had in the previous playbook, and IP reputation for the source address. And let me remove these. I have trimmed down the artifact, so we just have the North Korea address here. And these terminate into a decision block where I look for the country name being North Korea, or the reputation having a certain number of positive matches in VirusTotal. Otherwise we come down here. Incidentally, this block IP is just a mocked up code block, and this is just a prompt where I put in some variables. So let's go ahead and save this and run it. All right. So we can see already that we ended up with this block IP because we have this code here. And our decision, you can see right here that we had the 2 conditions. Right here, here's the other one. So North Korea equals North Korea, and 2 is greater than 0. These are the 2 conditions that I had. And so we went down this path. At the very beginning of this video, though, I talked about this join settings, and now we can really talk about it. So the deal is I have 2 different action blocks going into the decision, and I have it marked that both of these have to be finished before the decision will be made. Now, how does that work? If we look at the code, this looks pretty similar to what we've seen before. We have the matched artifact, a matched result with the condition API call. We do have the 2 conditions that I have specified here as a logical OR. We've got the check to see if we got anything back from the API, condition API call, and then we have this else block here. So where is this join logic happening? Certainly doesn't seem to be happening here. Well, where it's happening is in this full playbook code block. In the full playbook, if I scroll down, here's my decision 1 block. We know that, we've been looking at it. But just below it, you'll see a join decision 1. So the join decision 1, those join options get implemented into this, which is not visible when I just click the piece. You won't see it there. You have to click the full playbook to see this. So what do we see happening here? Well, we have a function, join decision one, and it has this API, action done, which is essentially looking if both of these have been completed. And if they have both been completed, it will run this decision, the decision one. So it essentially calls the actual decision. So in other words, when Geolocate fires, you can see that it's actually calling the join decision one callback, the function we were just looking at. And the IP reputation also calls join decision one. It doesn't actually call decision one. And then join decision one, once all of the upstream actions are complete, it then calls the actual decision one code. So that's how the join logic is implemented. And we can kind of demonstrate by coming in here, and I can, let's say I'm going to take IP reputation out, and then I'll go back here and join decision one. We can see now that we now only have one actions done here. So this is an important thing to understand, because you could run into a problem if you design your playbook in such a way that you expect a decision to handle multiple upstream blocks. Now, I know I said that last playbook was the last playbook, but I decided I wanted to elaborate on the join piece one more time, a little bit more deeply. So in this playbook, I've got a geolocate IP. It's exactly the same as we've been doing. We've got the source address. That's still just North Korea. I do a check to see if it's North Korea, and if it is, I go to IP reputation, and if it's not, I do a who is on the IP address. And then we collapse this back down to another decision block, where I check if the detected URLs is greater than 0, or if the who is was successful. And sort of everything to the right of this is a toy, because what I'm trying to demonstrate is this block itself. So what'll happen here, well, let's run this and see what happens. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to hit test. And we're going to look at the beginning. We have geolocate, just like we would expect. We can see that we hit decision one being called right there. That's perfect. We can see that we came down the green path and IP reputation was called, and that's because North Korea equals North Korea. That's true. And then the join decision block was called, just like we've been talking about. And then what do we see in the log? We see some actions have not even started, right? Not executed, who is IP. So that's it. Playbook stops. Because join decision 2 never called decision 2, because the configuration was such that both things were required. But if we think about this logically, this condition said we're going to go this way or this way, and then when we reconnected them, this guy says that both have to have run. But by the very nature of this configuration, these two can never run, because this is a this way or this way, but never both. So when you fan out this way, that's fine. But if you fan back in, you need to pay extra special care about your join settings. In a case like this, neither should be selected. And that's because the first time the join decision 2 gets called, we know that one of them has finished, and we're ready to call the decision 2 block, because we know that both of these will never run. So neither are required, but this won't get called until at least one of them is done. So if we save that, and we run it again, we got to join decision 2 was called, but then decision 2 was called, and my else condition, I have an else condition, not an else if condition, not an else condition. This success, I just made this up. This was not a real value. So neither of these downstream things got called. But the fact that decision 2 was called and then it ran the decision 2 demonstrates the point. So when you fan back in to a decision, pay extra special care to the join settings and make sure you're really thinking that all through. So this should conclude the decision block part of the series. It certainly went on longer than I thought, but hopefully it was informative, and we'll catch back up in the next video, which will be around filters. Thanks so much.